Hey guys, I'm James and this video will be a look at all of the spells added across the 3 DLCs for Dark Souls 2. I'll be showing you what each spell does along with a simple explanation of some strengths and weaknesses for each spell, so hopefully you'll find this useful. First up, for the Sunken King spells we have Focus Souls. Simply put, this is an improved version of Soulbolt that fires 4 lasers that close to a point at distance. This one is a multi-hit spell, so you should be aiming to hit for the whole duration of the spell, meaning it's best used at mid-range instead of long range. This is a fairly easy one for your opponent to strafe around as it doesn't track, and because of its long animation, it won't be the easiest one to combo with other things either. The best use for this one is to cast it in narrow areas, where most spells can be rolled straight through for a punish. The multi-hit on Focus Souls will prevent this and stop anyone rolling right towards you. As far as spell efficiency goes, Crystal Soul Spear is much more efficient for damage and tracking and ease of cast, but this one is pretty situational and can be nice when used in the right place. Next up is Dark Greatsword. This one has to be one of my favourite spells and also a contender for the most all-round useful spell. It's a combination of Soul Greatsword along with a projectile of the Moonlight Greatsword power attack for 2 separate hits. The sword part of this deals less damage and has less range than Soul Greatsword, so you should be looking to hit both parts of the spell each time to make an impact. This is a fairly safe one to cast at close range as your opponent will have to roll to avoid the damage instead of strafe, and even at long range the projectile is still viable. No real obvious downsides to this one aside from the large stat requirement, but those are totally worth it in my opinion as it can be used in pretty much any situation. Moving on, we have Promised Walker Peace. This one is comparable to Tranquil Walker Peace for those who remember that spell in Dark Souls 1, in the way that it slows the movement of opponents around you. The difference here is that rather than being a self buff, you actually have to be in range of the opponent at the time of the cast to affect them, much like Profound Still. The range on this one is one of the biggest in the game, so you don't have to worry about being too close, but there are a number of downsides to this spell. In addition to slowing your opponents down, you'll also slow your own movement down. This can be countered by having a very light setup, but even then, the cast animation is huge, so you'll likely get interrupted, or at least punished by most opponents in PvP. Alternatively, if someone guesses that you'll be casting this spell in particular, they could just back off out of range, wait for you to slow your own movement, and then use this effect against you. So I would say the best uses for this one are either on a very light build, who can cover the long cast animation with something like Lingering Flame or Scraps of Life so they can still move reasonably well, or on a tanky melee character who has plenty of armour and doesn't need to roll a great deal. Finally, for the Sunken King spells we have Denial. This one is a self buff that restores you to 1 HP upon a fatal blow whilst active. The buff wears off after each activation, so you'll need to recast if you need it more than once. There are no real downsides to not dying in a Souls game, so there's never really a bad time for this to be active, and it will be especially useful for those doing a New Game 7 challenge run where most things one-shot you anyway. The only thing to be aware of are attacks that cause a multi-hit, like Focus Souls or Fire Whip. These will cause the spell to activate and then still kill you on the next hit. The same goes for parries and backstabs. These actually count as 2 hits if you look closely, so one of these whilst you're at low health probably won't save you. Moving on to the first of 3 new pyromancies for the Iron King DLC. The first of these is called Dance of Fire, and this one casts similar to that of Combustion, except the flame moves horizontal in front of the player in a direction depending on which hand you cast it with. At first, this spell might seem less useful than the others because of its unique movement, and it makes it hard to guarantee to hit on a moving player. But the damage of this makes it more than worth it, and its real strength lies in starting a spell combo, such as casting other pyros right after it, to make the whole attack much harder for someone to dodge. Alternatively, you could cast this and follow up with melee attacks to mix things up and keep people guessing. The hitbox on this one is a little strange when someone is strafing around you, but for the most part it is very safe to cast close up if you can follow it with something else. Next up we have Fire Snake, which is a pyromancy cast in a similar way to the Firestorm type spells. The difference here is that the pillars move in a line in front of you as opposed to an area around the caster. Just like Firestorm spells, this one causes a knockdown on a successful hit, but does slightly less damage than that of Chaos Storm. As you can see, there is some tracking to the pillars as they will curve towards a strafing target, but for the most part this is a very easy one to dodge in open spaces and is perhaps the most punishable spell in the game on a missed hit due to the long animation you're locked in. One thing that will save you there, however, is that people usually see this cast animation and don't want to risk it being a firestorm, so they back away, sometimes even getting hit on the way back by this spell. But I would say the best place to use this one is in the narrow areas where the pillars can fill a hallway so as to prevent the opponent from getting to the side of you or even behind you whilst casting. The final thing to mention about this spell is that the pillars cause a single hit and not a prolonged pillar like Firestorm, meaning that it can be rolled straight through for 0 damage. The last Pyromancy of the Iron King DLC to look at is Outcry. This one is a variation of the Firestorm type spells and actually my personal favourite pyro in the game. This one differs from Firestorm in 3 main ways. First, it has a darker flame cast so you can tell this one apart from the others that cast this way. Second, the pillars have a shorter duration, which isn't actually a bad thing since they're still long enough to prevent a roll through. And finally, the most important difference is that you are locked in the cast animation for much less time. This means that you're free to move around after the spell much sooner than that of Chaos Storm, and so are less punishable by range, and you're also free to follow it with another attack, a weapon buff, or even a heal after you knock someone over. No huge downsides to this one, as the main weakness of being locked in the cast animation is much less of an issue. However, you do only get 1 use per 2 slots, unlike Chaos Storm which is 2 uses per 1 slot. This investment is more than worth it in my opinion because it can be used on any build in many situations. The final spell of the Iron King DLC is the Hex Recollection. This one is cast with a staff and fires 5 homing skulls at a single target. Unlike the other spells that track, such as Soul Spear and Homing Soul Arrow, you actually have to be locked on for these ones to home in. Now, one thing to bear in mind is this video is filmed with 60 Faith and Intelligence, the Abyss Seal, Dark Clutch Ring and a Dark Infused Sunset Staff, so the damage might seem pretty high but it'd be much lower on a build that isn't quite so optimised for hexes. As you can see here, the spell doesn't have full lock-on range, and it can easily be avoided or punished by someone who is up close, so its most potential is in medium range. This one will hit opponents at distance who are strafing at medium range, but it still can be rolled like most other things, and someone who rolls straight towards you will get out of the spell's effect very quickly. Damage aside, the real strength behind this one is the stamina damage of the spell. Each skull hit will drain stamina and can actually cause a stun lock if you catch someone who is already on low stamina, such as just after a roll. Even if someone manages to roll all of the skulls, you'll have gained a huge stamina advantage which you can follow up on. So I'd say the best use for this one is in a huge area, big open space, as the first spell that you actually cast before advancing with either a running attack or another cast. Moving on to the first of only 3 spells with the final DLC, we have Soul Flash. This one deals small damage around the caster which causes a knockdown on a successful hit. The damage isn't great but the requirements are low and it takes just 1 slot, so it can be used by many builds as a close range defense for the knockdown before setting up another attack. The damage can be rolled through but there are no real downsides to this spell as it casts quick and has no blind spot, so in my opinion it's a nice defensive addition for a caster. Next is the Miracle of the Ivory King DLC, Splintering Lightning Spear. This one casts in the same way as the other Lightning Spear spells, but the end result is a sort of ranged version of Heavenly Thunder. The initial cast can be free aimed up or down for different visuals, but it won't change the actual area or damage of the spell. Just like most area spells, this one does have a chance to completely miss even if the opponent stood still, and whilst it does look a really cool cast, it has a lot of downsides. The first of these being that it usually only hits once, unlike Heavenly Thunder which can hit multiple times, is a faster cast, a longer effect and much less stats investment. It also has a very long cast animation and a fairly small area of effect compared to the likes of Firestorm or Outcry. Even utilising its ranged option, Blinding Bolt is still a much more efficient choice in most areas, so this spell is situational at best, and I've had the most success with it in areas like Drang Lake Castle where it can fill small areas like the hallways and be very hard to dodge if you manage to get the cast. One last thing to be aware of with this cast is that whilst lightning spears are easy enough to punish at the best of times, you can actually tell this one apart by the slightly thinner spear during the cast animation. So if you're facing someone who's able to see this difference, it can mean big trouble if they have the counter at the ready. The final spell of this video is the Hex Dark Dance. This one is similar to Dark Greatsword in the way of it being a mix between two different spells. The first part is a shockwave like a damaging type of force, and the second part is 5 orbs similar to that of Soul Mass which have slight tracking. Neither part of the spell is too impressive on its own, as the force doesn't deal huge damage and the orbs barely track with very poor distance, so you should be aiming to hit both parts. The ideal range for this one is just on the edge of the shockwave so that the orbs can track and all hit the target. Any further and the shockwave won't reach, and any closer will mean some of the orbs will miss. If both parts of this spell do connect, then it can be one of the most damaging attacks in the game, so it is a worthwhile one to carry if you're able to cast it. There are no real downsides to actually casting this one, since the shockwave hits all around you and prevents most punishes, but the spell has one of the highest stat requirements in the game and takes 2 slots, whilst costing 5,000 souls to cast each time. Although the biggest and most unfortunate downside is that it is possible to roll after being hit with a shockwave, so you won't hit someone with both parts unless they actively decide not to roll. This means that the spell is great for destroying random players online who are trying to spam through your attacks without any attempt to dodge, but it is fairly bad in a duel against a decent player who is familiar with this weakness of Dark Dance. Okay guys, that concludes this look at the 11 new spells across the 3 DLCs for Dark Souls 2 so far. I hope this has helped you see how each spell works and what to expect from each one, along with some possible uses against other players online. If you haven't already, take a look at the links below to some of the previous videos that I made to showcase the other spells from around the game. There's one for each of the 4 types of magic, and they're laid out much in the same way as this one. Now, as with any magic, if you use one spell at a time or cast the same thing over and over, it becomes very predictable and easy to counter by blocking, dodging, or just high resistance, so the key is to mix it up. With that in mind, I plan to make a video at some point showcasing the spells that string together to form a combo, making them much more damaging and harder to dodge. Until then, feel free to check out the 4 videos linked below. These are PvP invasions using 2 types of magic per video and a themed spell sword with some light melee sidearms. You'll see plenty of combos in these against real players online, so hopefully that'll show you what works and what doesn't. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you either on the next video or the next stream. Goodbye for now.